The first time Miriam saw the little girl, she almost dropped her tea. It was 11 o'clock at night. The street was empty and quiet, the way streets get when everyone has gone to bed and the whole world seems to be holding its breath. Miriam Johnson was sitting in her favorite chair by the window, the one with a soft blue cushion that her late husband Earl had bought her 30 years ago, and she was doing what she always did when sleep refused to come. She was watching, not in a nosy way. At least, that is what she told herself. She watched because the street was her world. She had lived on Elm Crescent for 41 years. She had watched children grow into adults, watched houses change their colors, watched neighbors come and go like seasons. At 68, with Earl gone and her own children living far away, the window was her quiet company. But nothing had prepared her for what she saw that Tuesday night. A black car turned slowly onto the street. Not just any car. This one was the kind that looked like it had been polished with something expensive. It moved without hurry, without noise, like a shadow that had learned how to drive. It stopped in front of number 47, the old garage at the very end of the block. That garage had been empty for years. Old Mr. Peterson had run a small car repair shop there once, back when the neighborhood was younger and louder. When he died, nobody came to claim it. The windows went dark. The sign fell. Weeds pushed through the cracks in the pavement, like they were trying to escape something buried underneath. Nobody went there anymore. So when the car stopped, Miriam leaned forward in her chair. The door opened. A man stepped out. He was tall, broad in the shoulders, dressed in a suit so sharp and clean it almost seemed wrong on that broken little street. He moved with the kind of confidence that money teaches you, slow, deliberate, like the world had agreed to wait for him. He walked around to the other side of the car and opened the back door. A little girl climbed out. She couldn't have been older than 9 or 10. She wore a bright yellow dress, the kind of dress you wear to a birthday party or church on Sunday, not to a dark street at 11 o'clock at night. Her hair was pulled into 2 puffs on either side of her head. She was small. She held the man's hand tightly, the way children hold hands when they are trying to be brave but don't quite feel it yet. The man unlocked the garage with a key. The door rolled up with a slow metallic groan. Then he guided the little girl inside, and the door rolled back down behind them. Miriam sat very still. Her tea went cold. She waited for them to come back out. She waited 10 minutes, then 20, then 40. When the clock on the mantelpiece showed 5 minutes past midnight, the garage door groaned open again. The man came out first, looked left, then right, the way people do when they are checking for something they don't want to be seen. Then the little girl followed. They got back in the black car, and just like that, they were gone. Miriam didn't sleep that night. She lay in her bed with the ceiling staring back at her, and her mind spinning like a wheel that couldn't find its stop. Who was that man? Who was that child? Why was she wearing a party dress in the middle of the night? Why that garage, of all places, the emptiest, most forgotten building on the street? She told herself she was being dramatic. She told herself there was a perfectly simple explanation, but a feeling in her chest, quiet and cold, like a stone sitting in still water, told her otherwise. The next night they came back. Same time, same black car, same yellow dress. The little girl this time was carrying something. It looked like a small backpack, the kind with cartoon characters on it. The man carried 2 bags. Groceries, maybe, or something else entirely. Miriam watched them go inside again. She watched the garage door close. She sat in her chair until her back ached and her eyes burned. They came out again just before midnight, and the car disappeared around the corner. By the 3rd night, Miriam's worry had grown teeth. She began to notice things she hadn't noticed before. The little girl never smiled. She walked close to the man, very close, but she never looked around the way children usually do, curious about everything. She kept her eyes low, her chin tucked. Once, just as they were about to go inside, a cat knocked over a tin can on the opposite pavement and made a crash in the silence. The little girl flinched so hard she nearly fell. The man caught her. He put his hand gently on her shoulder and said something close to her ear. The girl nodded slowly. They went inside. Miriam pressed her hand to her mouth. Something was wrong. She could feel it the way you feel rain before a single drop falls. Something in the air, something in the weight of the quiet. A little girl in a yellow dress in an abandoned garage. Past midnight. 3 nights in a row. She picked up her phone and then put it back down. What would she say? She hadn't seen anything illegal. She hadn't heard anything. But wasn't that the problem with terrible things? They didn't always make noise. Sometimes they happened in perfect silence, behind closed doors, and the only people who ever knew were the ones brave enough to ask. Miriam looked out at the dark garage. The stone in her chest grew heavier. She had to find out the truth, whatever it cost her. Miriam didn't go to Clara's house. Clara came to her. That was how it always worked between them. 40 years of friendship had built its own rhythm. Clara showed up when she was needed, the same way sunshine shows up after a long gray week, without being called and without being late. She arrived on Thursday morning with a tin of homemade ginger biscuits, and one look at Miriam's face told her everything. "You haven't slept?" Clara said, setting the biscuits on the kitchen table and pulling out a chair. "I've slept," Miriam said. "You've closed your eyes," Clara replied. "That's different." Miriam sat down across from her oldest friend and wrapped both hands around her mug of tea. Outside, the street was doing its daytime things. A dog barking somewhere, a child on a bicycle, the distant hum of a lawnmower. Normal sounds. Safe sounds. The kind of sound that made what Miriam had seen over the past 3 nights feel almost impossible to explain. But she explained it anyway. She told Clara everything. The black car, the man in the sharp suit, the little girl in the yellow dress, the garage door rolling up and then rolling back down like a mouth swallowing them whole, the way the girl flinched at the sound of a falling tin can, the way she never smiled, the way the man checked left and right before they came out, like someone who was always afraid of being watched. Clara listened without interrupting, which was unusual for Clara. She held her biscuit halfway to her mouth and forgot to bite it. When Miriam finished, the kitchen was very quiet. "A tall man," Clara said slowly. "Broad shoulders. Black car. Tailored suit." "Yes." Clara put her biscuit down. "Miriam, I think I know who that is." His name was Charles Rivers. Clara had learned about him the way people in small neighborhoods learn about everything. Through careful listening, through whispered conversations at the pharmacy, through the kind of talk that travels faster than any newspaper. Charles Rivers had lived 3 streets over, on Birchwood Avenue, in a big white house with a double garage and a garden that his wife had kept full of roses. Had lived. Past tense. 2 years ago, something went badly wrong. Clara wasn't sure of all the details. Nobody was, because Charles Rivers was a man who kept his pain private, locked behind good manners and an expensive suit. But the broad shape of the story was this. He had invested heavily in a business. The business had collapsed. Not slowly, the way some things fall apart, but suddenly, the way a bridge gives way all at once. No warning, just a terrible crack, and then nothing. He lost nearly everything. The house on Birchwood Avenue was taken by the bank. His wife, Clara lowered her voice here, though there was nobody else in the kitchen. His wife had left not long after. Couldn't handle the shame of it, some said. Others said she tried to stay, and Charles had pushed her away. Nobody knew which version was true. Maybe both were. And then Charles Rivers simply disappeared from the neighborhood. No goodbye, no forwarding address. There one day, gone the next, like a name erased from a page. Until now, Miriam sat with all of this settling inside her like sediment, sinking to the bottom of a disturbed lake. She thought about the man she had seen, the careful way he moved, the deliberate slowness of him, and she understood something she hadn't before. That wasn't the walk of a man who had everything. That was the walk of a man who was working very hard to look like he did. But who is the girl? Miriam asked. Clara shook her head slowly. I don't know. Charles never had children of his own. The stone in Miriam's chest shifted. Not his daughter. Then who? That evening, the whispers found Miriam whether she wanted them or not. She went to the corner shop for milk and ran into Dottie Barnes, who always knew more than was healthy for one person to know. Dottie had already heard. From whom? She refused to say, that a man had been seen coming and going from the old Peterson garage late at night. Dottie's eyebrows were raised so high, they had practically disappeared into her hairline. "People are saying all sorts," Dottie said, leaning close over the refrigerated section. "Margaret from number 12 says she saw a child. Says she doesn't like the look of it one bit. Ted's wife says someone should call the authorities." Miriam felt her jaw tighten. "Nobody knows anything yet," she said carefully. "Well, something's going on," Dottie said. "Normal people don't use abandoned garages at midnight. Normal people don't hide." Miriam paid for her milk and walked home faster than usual. She understood Dottie. She had thought the same things herself, in the dark of her bedroom, in the long, anxious hours between midnight and morning. The mind goes to dark places when it doesn't have enough light to work with. That is simply what minds do. But something about the way Charles had placed his hand on the little girl's shoulder when she flinched, something about the gentleness of it, the steadiness, had lodged itself in a quieter part of Miriam's thinking. Fear didn't move like that. Cruelty didn't move like that. Whatever was happening in that garage, it wasn't simple. Friday night, Miriam made a decision. She put on her coat at 10:30. She tied her shoes slowly and carefully, the way she always did when she was nervous. Double knot, press flat, don't rush. She made sure her porch light was off, so the street would see nothing unusual. And then she sat in her chair and she waited. The black car arrived at 11 o'clock exactly. Miriam watched Charles get out, watched him open the back door, watched the little girl climb out, still in that yellow dress. A different yellow dress this time, she realized, slightly darker, with small white buttons down the front. Still bright, still wrong for the hour. She stood up. Her heart was knocking loudly against her ribs. Every sensible part of her was saying, "Go back to your chair, Miriam. Go back to your tea and your window and your safe blue cushion. This is not your business." But Earl used to say something back when he was alive. He used to say that most of the world's cruelty survives because decent people decide it's not their business. Miriam opened her front door and stepped outside. The night air was cold and sharp. The street was empty except for the black car idling softly at the curb and Charles Rivers standing beside it, reaching into the back seat for the bags. He hadn't seen her yet. The little girl was already walking toward the garage door, her small shoes making quiet sounds on the pavement. Miriam walked toward them. "Excuse me," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. Charles straightened up fast, startled, one bag clutched in each hand. He turned. In the thin light of the street lamp, Miriam saw his face clearly for the first time, and what she saw surprised her. He wasn't dangerous looking. He was tired, deeply, profoundly tired, the kind of tired that sleep alone cannot fix. There were shadows beneath his eyes that hadn't come from one bad night, but from a long series of them. He looked at her with wariness, but not anger. The little girl had stopped walking. She turned around and looked at Miriam with wide, cautious eyes, dark brown, very still, the eyes of a child who had learned to measure people quickly. "I'm Miriam," Miriam said. "I live at number 32. I don't mean you any harm." She paused. "But I need to know that she is all right." Charles Rivers looked at the little girl. Then he looked back at Miriam. And something in his face, that carefully constructed wall of pride and privacy, began slowly to crack. Charles Rivers didn't speak right away. He stood in the thin yellow light of the street lamp, a bag in each hand, and looked at Miriam the way a man looks at something he is trying to decide whether to trust. The street was silent around them. Even the wind seemed to be holding still, waiting. The little girl stayed where she was near the garage door. She hadn't run. She hadn't hidden behind Charles. She just stood there with her hands clasped in front of her yellow dress, watching Miriam with those wide, careful eyes. Finally, Charles set the bags down on the ground. "Her name is Amara," he said. His voice was low and even, but there was something underneath it, something tired and frayed, like a rope that had been pulled too tight for her too long. "She is my niece." Miriam didn't say anything. She waited. That is a skill that comes with age. If you are lucky, the ability to stay quiet and let the truth find its own way out. Miriam had learned it from Earl, who used to say that silence was the most honest invitation you could offer another person. Charles looked down at the pavement for a moment. Then he looked back up. Her parents, my sister and her husband, they died 14 months ago. A car accident on the highway coming back from a wedding. He stopped, pressed his lips together. Amara was not in the car. She was at home with a babysitter. She was the only one who came back. The words landed softly but heavily, the way snow lands, quiet, and yet it changes everything it touches. Miriam looked at Amara. The little girl had not moved. She was listening to the story of her own life being told to a stranger in the middle of the night, and her face held an expression that no child's face should ever have to hold. The expression of someone who has already done all their crying and has arrived at the dry, aching place on the other side of it. "I'm so sorry," Miriam said. She meant it the way you only mean things when words feel completely inadequate. Charles told her the rest of it, standing right there on the pavement. He told her about the business he had built over 12 years, an investment firm, carefully grown, carefully managed. He told her about the market crash that came like a storm nobody had properly forecasted, that swallowed his firm whole in a matter of weeks. He told her about the loans he had taken, the debts that remained, the house on Birchwood Avenue that the bank reclaimed on a cold morning in November while he stood in the front garden and watched strangers put notices on his door. He told her about his wife leaving, not with cruelty. She had left quietly, tearfully, saying she couldn't watch him disappear into his own shame. He hadn't fought it. He hadn't had the energy. And then, 3 months after all of that, his sister died. Amara had nobody else. Charles said simply, "Our parents are gone. There are no other siblings." There was no one. He glanced at his niece, and for just a moment, something wore moved across his exhausted face. Not quite a smile, but the shape of one. "So she came to me. But where are you living?" Miriam asked. She kept her voice gentle, careful, the way you speak around something fragile. Charles was quiet for a beat too long. Miriam looked at the bags on the ground. She looked at the garage. She looked at the yellow dress, clean, pressed, well cared for, and then she understood something that made her chest ache so deeply she had to press her hand against it. "Charles," she said softly. He straightened his shoulders. That automatic pride, that old reflex. "It is temporary," he said. "I have work now, consulting part-time. I am saving. We are managing." "You're living in the garage," Miriam said, not as an accusation, just as a truth that needed to be said out loud, gently, between two people standing in the dark. He didn't deny it. The garage. The abandoned, forgotten garage at the end of Elm Crescent. He had found it empty, contacted the estate. Old Mr. Peterson had left it to a nephew who lived abroad and wanted nothing to do with it, and arranged informal use of it for a small amount he could afford. He had cleaned it, put down a rug, bought 2 camping beds, a small electric heater, a lamp. He came late at night, so the neighbors wouldn't see. Left early in the morning for the same reason. He had been keeping Amara in school. That was non-negotiable, he said, his voice firming for the first time. Her schooling was the one thing he would not let collapse. He dropped her each morning and collected her each afternoon, driving the black car that was in fact the last valuable thing he owned and had refused to sell, because without it he couldn't get her to school. Every night he pressed the yellow dress and laid it out for mourning, because Amara's mother had loved yellow, had dressed her daughter in it since she was a baby. And Charles had decided, in the quiet, determined way of someone who has lost almost everything, that his niece would not lose that too. Miriam stood on that pavement for a long time after Charles finished speaking. She thought about Dottie Barnes and her raised eyebrows. She thought about Margaret from number 12 and Ted's wife, who wanted to call the authorities. She thought about how quickly fear grows in the dark, how fast a story becomes a rumor, how easily a tired man and a grieving child can become something sinister simply because nobody stopped long enough to ask. Then she thought about Earl, about his voice, low and warm, saying, "The most important thing you can ever do for another person is show up." She looked at Amara. "How old are you, sweetheart?" she asked. The little girl blinked. It was the first time anyone had spoken directly to her. 9, she said. Her voice was small, but clear. "Do you like hot chocolate?" Amara looked up at Charles. He looked at Miriam, confused, cautious. "I have a spare room," Miriam said. "Two, actually. They've been empty since my youngest moved to Edinburgh 7 years ago, and I keep meaning to do something with them and never do." She paused. "I have a proper kitchen, a bathroom with hot water, a garden that has gone completely wild because these knees are not what they were." She looked at Charles steadily. "I am not offering charity. I am offering a neighbor's hand. There is a difference, and I need you to understand that." Charles opened his mouth, closed it. "Pride is a useful thing," Miriam continued. "I had a husband who was a proud man, and I loved him fiercely for it. But pride kept to itself has never once fed a child or kept one warm." She looked at Amara again, at those careful brown eyes that had seen too much for 9 years. "Let somebody help you. Let somebody in." The silence stretched between them like a held breath. And then, very quietly, Charles Rivers, a man who built a firm from nothing, lost it to the wind, buried his sister, held his knees together with the last of his strength, and pressed a yellow dress every single night so that one small thing would remain, put his face in his hands and wept. Amara walked to him without hesitation. She put her small arms around him and pressed her cheek against his side and held on. Miriam stood with him in the quiet street and said nothing, because some moments don't need words. Some moments only need a witness. Later that night, after hot chocolate had been made and drunk, after Mara had fallen asleep in the yellow bedroom at the top of the stairs with the duvet pulled her chin and the lamp left on low, Miriam sat at the kitchen table across from Charles Rivers. He looked different in proper light, still tired, but somehow less alone. "I don't know how to thank you," he said. "You can thank me by letting me help you find proper support," Miriam said. "There are people, organizations, resources. Clara knows everyone worth knowing in this town, and I intend to call her first thing in the morning." Charles nodded slowly. Miriam wrapped her hands around her mug. "That child has been through enough," she said. "She deserves walls and warmth and a garden to run around in, even if the old woman who owns it can't keep up with the weeding." She smiled for the first time all evening. "And so do you." Charles looked down at the table. "I was so ashamed," he said quietly. "I kept thinking, if I could just fix it myself, if I could just hold it together long enough. I didn't want anyone to see." "I know," Miriam said, "but shame is a very small room to live in, and nobody should raise a child in a small room." She reached across the table and patted his hand once, firmly, the way her mother used to do when Miriam was young and frightened and needed reminding that the world was survivable. "You are not alone on this street anymore." When Miriam finally went to bed that night, the house felt different, fuller, like a door had been opened somewhere, and good air was moving through rooms that had been still too long. She lay in the dark and thought about the window, the blue cushion, the street she had watched for 41 years. She thought about how the mystery she had built in her imagination, sinister, threatening, full of dark possibilities, had turned out to be something else entirely. A man, a child, a yellow dress, a garage that had become, out of necessity and love, the only shelter they had. The most frightening stories, she thought, are not always the ones with monsters. Sometimes the most frightening story is simply the one about how far a person can fall and how long they can fall alone before someone finally looks up and holds out a hand. She closed her eyes. Down the hall, Amara slept, and for the first time in 14 months, she did not sleep in a garage. She slept in a home. If this story moved you, made you feel something real, or reminded you that the people around us are carrying more than we know, please like, share, and subscribe. You never know who needs to read a story like this today. Someone in your circle might be living in their own abandoned garage, not made of brick and metal, but of silence and pride and quiet desperation. Share this. Be somebody's Miriam.